A humble young woman was humiliated by her father in the square, until a lonely count took her away. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Maria was a humble young woman, born into a family with little wealth or influence. She lived her life under the strict rule of her father, a man whose cold heart had little room for affection. As the only daughter, Maria was expected to uphold her family's name, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. On a cold afternoon in the town square, Maria found herself at the mercy of her father's harsh words. She stood in front of the crowd, her father's bitter voice echoing through the streets, telling her she was nothing but a burden, a disappointment to the family. The people of the town watched as he humiliated her, the weight of their judgment crashing down upon her fragile shoulders. Tears blurred Maria's vision, but she held her head high, refusing to let her father see her cry. The humiliation was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the deep wound her father had inflicted on her heart. Just as she thought the world had turned its back on her, fate intervened. From the shadows of the square, a figure emerged. A tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and a weary expression. It was Count Alexander, a man known for his solitary nature and his disdain for the world around him. He had seen enough of Maria's suffering from afar and could no longer stand by. Without a word, he approached her, offering a hand to help her up, an act of kindness that caught her completely off guard. For the first time in years, Maria felt someone cared for her, not because of her family's name or wealth, but for who she truly was. The Count's presence was like a beacon in the storm of her life, and for the first time, Maria dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love. He led her away from the square, away from the life she had known, and into the unknown. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness would change her life forever. After leaving the square, Maria followed Count Alexander through narrow alleyways and onto a quiet, dimly lit street. The storm had calmed somewhat, but the air was still biting cold. Maria's breath came out in soft puffs, visible in the frigid night air. As they walked, she couldn't help but glance at the man beside her. Count Alexander was silent, his eyes focused ahead, his expression unreadable. He was a tall figure, draped in dark clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows. Yet there was a strength about him, a quiet authority that Maria could feel even in his silence. His presence was unsettling, yet comforting, as though he had the power to make the world right again if he chose to. When they reached a large, iron gate, Count Alexander pushed it open without a word, leading Maria onto the grounds of his estate. The mansion loomed before her, a grand structure covered in ivy, its stone walls standing firm against the elements. The windows were dark, the place feeling as if it had been abandoned for years, yet there was something mysterious about it, something that made Maria feel both frightened and strangely at peace. They entered the mansion, and Count Alexander gestured for Maria to follow him inside. The hall was cold, but the warmth of a crackling fire could be seen in the distance. She followed him, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors, until they reached a large, dimly lit room. He turned to her. "You will be safe here for now. I'll have someone prepare a room for you." His voice was low, almost gravelly, but there was no hint of warmth in it. It was as though he spoke out of habit, without truly caring about what she might be feeling. Maria nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and watched as he disappeared down the hallway. She stood there for a moment, alone in the vast, empty room. The walls seemed to close in on her, but the firelight gave her some sense of solace. She moved toward the fireplace, letting the warmth seep into her frozen bones. It had been hours since. Her father had humiliated her in front of the entire town. Hours since she had been thrust into this new life, one she never expected. The reality of her situation sank in. She was alone. She had no one. Her father had abandoned her, leaving her with nothing but the remnants of her dignity, shattered on the cobblestones of the town square. A sudden knock on the door broke her reverie. "Come in," she called softly, almost afraid of what might happen next. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped inside, her face lined with age but her eyes kind and warm. She carried a tray with a steaming bowl of soup and a mug of hot tea. "I've brought you something to eat," the woman said gently, placing the tray on a nearby table. "I know it's been a long day for you." Maria looked at the woman, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the crying and the cold. The woman smiled softly, her eyes filled with empathy. "I'm Mrs. Winters. I've served the Count for many years. You'll find that he is a man of few words, but he has a good heart, even if he doesn't show it." Maria nodded, unsure what to say. She wasn't sure if she could trust anyone in this strange place, especially the Count, whose mysterious and distant demeanor had unsettled her. Mrs. Winters hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You're safe here, child. But remember, the Count, he's been through a lot himself. It's not easy, living in this house. There are things you won't understand at first. Just be patient, and you'll see." Maria glanced up at Mrs. Winters, who was now standing by the door. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity getting the best of her. The woman paused, her gaze shifting to the fire for a moment. "The Count, he lost someone very dear to him. He's not the same man he once was. But you'll see. In time, things will change." Before Maria could ask more, Mrs. Winters quietly left the room, leaving her alone once again with her thoughts. The fire crackled softly in the corner, and Maria couldn't help but wonder about the man who had saved her. Who was Count Alexander? What kind of life had he led, and why had he decided to help her? Was it out of pity, or was there something more? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers. For the first time in a long while, Maria allowed herself to close her eyes, the warmth of the fire and the scent of the soup filling her senses as she drifted into a restless sleep, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever, and there was no going back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Maria whispered, feeling the weight of the Count's gaze upon her as she stood by the fire. The warm glow of the flames flickered across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to echo the stillness of the mansion. She hadn't realized how much time had passed since Mrs. Winters left her alone, but now she found herself lost in thought, her mind racing with unanswered questions about her new life, about the mysterious Count who had rescued her from the streets. "No intrusion at all." Count Alexander's voice broke through the silence, calm but distant. He stepped into the room, his presence almost as commanding as the walls that surrounded them. "It is you who are in need of rest, not me. Please sit." He gestured toward a chair near the fire, his tone softer than before, yet still wrapped in an air of formality. Maria hesitated, unsure of what to make of him. The man who had once seemed so distant, so cold, was now extending a rare kindness, but it was still hard to shake the image of his stone-cold expression when they first met. She slowly took a seat by the fire, her eyes never straying far from him. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of what else to say. The Count didn't speak at once. Instead, he stood by the mantelpiece, staring into the flames, as if lost in his own thoughts. His posture, rigid and unmoving, reminded Maria of the countless times she had seen men like him, the powerful, wealthy individuals who never allowed themselves to show weakness. But something about the way he held himself now, his tense shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally flickered with emotion, made Maria wonder what was behind the walls he had built around himself. "You must be wondering why I've brought you here," Count Alexander finally spoke, his voice low, almost unreadable. Maria nodded slowly, still uncertain of the best way to answer. Her mind was still reeling from the shock of being taken in by this stranger, a man who seemed as closed off as her father, yet who had offered her a sanctuary she never thought she'd have. "I didn't have a choice," she said softly. "I don't know where else to go." The Count turned to face her then, his eyes locking onto hers for the first time since they arrived at Greycourt Hall. "I understand," he said quietly. "You must feel lost, but this place is a refuge for now. I won't ask you to explain yourself. I know enough about pain to understand when someone needs time." His words struck a chord deep within Maria, stirring emotions she had buried for years. She had grown up with the weight of her family's expectations, her father's cruelty, and the constant fear that she wasn't good enough. She had been taught to be strong, to hold her tears inside, but in that moment, she felt a shift. For the first time in her life, Someone had offered her something she hadn't known she needed, understanding. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence Maria had grown accustomed to. It was different here, quieter, filled with the possibility of something more. She let out a breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders eased just slightly. "I'm sorry for what happened," she said, her voice trembling. "For how I was treated." Count Alexander's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "You are not the one to blame, Maria," he said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. If anything, it is the world around you that has failed you." His words, though simple, were a balm to her wounded heart. She had been taught to accept the blame for everything that went wrong in her life, to carry the shame of her father's actions as though it were her own. Yet here, in this moment, she was finally being told she didn't have to. For the first time, she felt the weight of her father's cruel words begin to lift, if only just a little. She looked up at the Count, her expression softening. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know what's going to happen to me." The Count gave a slight nod, his eyes reflecting a hint of understanding. "For now, all you need to do is rest," he said, his tone more gentle than before. "You will have time to decide what comes next. But remember, you are not alone in this." As the fire crackled behind them, Maria felt a flicker of hope rise within her. She wasn't sure where this strange journey would take her, or what life would look like from here on out. But in this moment, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet company of the Count, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of possibility. The following days at Greycourt Hall were a blur for Maria. She spent most of her time alone, wandering the quiet halls of the mansion, trying to come to terms with the changes that had occurred in her life. The storm had passed, but the stillness of the house seemed to carry a weight that lingered in the air. Count Alexander was distant, though not unkind. He had given her the freedom to explore the mansion, and every morning, Mrs. Winters would bring her a tray of breakfast, always with a warm smile and kind words. Yet, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the Count was a man haunted by something, a part of him buried deep beneath his cold exterior. He rarely spoke of his past, and she didn't have the courage to ask. Every evening, after the house had grown silent, Maria would sit by the fire, staring into the flames as if they could offer some clarity. She was unsure what her future held, but the thought of returning to her father's cruelty was unbearable. As days turned into weeks, she found herself growing more accustomed to the rhythm of the house, though her thoughts often drifted to the man who had saved her. One afternoon, as she was walking through the gardens, she noticed Count Alexander standing by the old stone fountain, his back to her. His posture was rigid, as it always was, but there was something different about this moment. He was staring at the water, lost in thought, his face shrouded in the shadows of the tall trees that lined the garden. Maria hesitated before approaching him, unsure if she should disturb his solitude. But something inside her urged her. "Forward, Your Grace," she called softly, her voice almost lost in the gentle breeze. Count Alexander turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Maria," he acknowledged, his voice quieter than usual. "How are you finding the house?" Maria took a hesitant step forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's beautiful," she said, her gaze sweeping across the manicured garden. "But still, I feel like I don't belong here." The Count's eyes softened slightly, and for a brief moment, Maria could see a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't the usual coldness. "You belong here as much as anyone else," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Maria nodded, but the doubt still lingered in her heart. "Thank you, Your Grace," she murmured. There was an awkward silence between them, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, the Count spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. "I never wanted this life," he said, his gaze drifting back to the fountain. "The loneliness, the responsibility. It's not what I imagined when I was young. But sometimes, life doesn't give you a choice." Maria felt a pang of sympathy for him. She had never imagined that the Count, the powerful Duke of Greycourt, would feel the same emptiness that she had felt all her life. "I understand," she said quietly. "I never imagined my life would be like this either. But sometimes, we just have to accept what comes, don't we?" The Count turned to face her, his gaze searching hers. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "We do." They stood there for a long moment, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only noise between them. Maria felt as though she was finally beginning to understand the Count, even if only a little. She had been so quick to judge him, to think of him as just another cold, distant man of power, but now she saw the burden he carried. He wasn't just the man who had saved her from her father's cruelty. He was a man who had lived through his own share of pain. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the garden, Maria knew that things were beginning to change between them. She no longer felt like an intruder in his world, but a part of it. And though she didn't know what the future held, she couldn't deny that the Count's presence had started to fill the empty space inside her heart, a space she thought would never be touched again. "I apologize for the delay," Count Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of frustration as he entered the room where Maria was sitting by the fire. Maria looked up, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "You've been busy?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with curiosity. The Count nodded, though his expression remained impassive. "I had some matters to attend to," he replied, his gaze briefly flicking to the desk, where a stack of papers lay untouched. Maria watched him for a moment, sensing the tension in the air. It was as though he was burdened by more than just the responsibilities of his title. "You don't have to explain," she said, her voice softening. "I understand that you have your duties." He turned toward her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, his dark, brooding eyes studying her as if trying to decipher her thoughts. "I never wanted to involve you in my problems," he said, his tone unexpectedly vulnerable. Maria felt her heart tighten at the words. She had never expected the Count to open up to her, and yet here he was, revealing a part of himself she had never imagined. "I never asked for this," he continued, his gaze lowering. "I never wanted to be the one to carry the weight of this estate, the responsibilities, the constant pressure." Maria remained silent, her heart aching for him. She had seen the stoic, distant man who ran Greycourt Hall, but this was the first time she saw him as a person, someone who had feelings, someone who struggled just like she did. "It's not easy, being alone," he added, his voice quieter now. "The loneliness has a way of creeping in when you least expect it." Maria felt her throat tighten at his words. She could relate to that feeling, the ache of being isolated, the fear of being forgotten. "But you're not alone anymore," she said softly, surprising even herself with her words. The Count's eyes snapped up to meet hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in them. Hope, maybe, or maybe something more. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. Maria took a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what she felt. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I may not have much to offer, but I'm here, and I will not abandon you." Count Alexander's gaze softened, his shoulders relaxing as he took a step closer to her. The air between them shifted, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the room. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his voice a mere whisper. "I never thought I would find someone like you," he said, his words almost lost in the stillness of the room. Maria felt her heart skip a beat at his confession. She wasn't sure what to say, but she didn't need to speak. The silence between them said it all. In that moment, something changed. The Count, the man who had seemed so distant and cold, was no longer just a figure of authority. He was someone who had opened himself to her, someone who was no longer alone in his pain. And Maria, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like a burden. She felt like she belonged, like she mattered. "You don't have to carry everything on your own," she said, her voice steady. "I can help, if you'll let me." Count Alexander's eyes softened as he looked at her, his expression no longer as guarded as it had been. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. Maria smiled softly, a sense of peace settling over her. "You're welcome," she replied. The fire crackled softly in the background as they stood there, neither of them speaking for a long moment. It was a simple silence, but it was full of understanding. Maria had never imagined that her life would lead her to this moment, standing in the heart of Greycourt Hall with the Count, someone who had once seemed like a stranger, now standing by her side. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was where she was meant to be. And as the days passed, as they began to work together to restore Greycourt Hall, Maria realized that there was more to the Count than she had ever imagined. He wasn't just the man who had rescued her from her father's cruelty. He was someone who had suffered, just like she had. And together, they would heal the wounds of the past. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Maria and Count Alexander were no longer alone. "I'm glad to see you up and about," Count Alexander said as he entered the room, his voice carrying a warmth that Maria had not heard before. She turned from the window, where she had been gazing out at the sprawling grounds of Greycourt Hall, her thoughts distant. Over the past few weeks, she had found herself drawn more and more into the rhythm of life at the mansion, but a part of her still longed for answers, for the reason she had been brought here, and for the feelings that were slowly stirring within her. "Thank you for letting me stay here," Maria said quietly, her voice soft yet filled with sincerity. "I've started to feel like I belong, even though everything is so new." The Count paused, his gaze lingering on her, as though weighing her words. There was a shift in his eyes, something that spoke of vulnerability, something Maria had never seen in him before. "I'm glad you feel that way," he replied, his voice lower than usual. "You deserve to feel at peace." He stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a subtle shift, a movement toward something more. "I've been thinking," Maria began hesitantly, her fingers clasping together in front of her. "About everything. About why you took me in, why you've been so kind." The Count's eyes softened, and he moved closer, standing just a few feet away from her, as if allowing her the space to speak freely. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "I took you in because you needed help. But more than that, I think we both needed someone. Life has a way of bringing people together when they least expect it." Maria felt the weight of his words, the truth behind them. It wasn't just about her, it was about him too. The Count was someone who had been locked away, hiding behind walls of his own making, just as she had done for most of her life. For the first time, she felt she wasn't the only one in need of healing. "I never thought I could trust anyone again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything that happened with my father, with my past. But with you." She faltered, unsure how to continue, but the Count nodded, his expression understanding. "It's hard to trust," he said softly. "But sometimes, the only way to heal is to take a step forward, even when we're afraid." Maria looked up at him, meeting his gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just an understanding that went deeper than words could convey. "Do you ever regret it?" Maria asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Taking me in, I mean. I know it must be hard, to share this space with someone you hardly know." Count Alexander was silent for a moment, as if considering her words carefully. Then, slowly he shook his head. "No," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "I don't regret it. I think we both needed a change, Maria. This house, this life, it's not what either of us planned. But sometimes, what we need isn't what we expect." There was a pause between them, a heavy, unspoken understanding, as the room seemed to hold its breath. Maria's heart raced, her emotions swirling inside her. But there was something in the Count's presence that made her feel grounded, made her feel as if, for once, everything might just be okay. "I've been thinking about the future too," she said after a while, her voice steady now, though her heart was still uncertain. "About what happens next. I know I can't stay here forever. I don't know what my place is in the world, but I want to find it." The Count looked at her, his expression serious but not unkind. "You will find your place," he said, his words reassuring. "And whatever that is, I will be here to help you. I won't abandon you." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Maria could feel deep in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had someone to rely on, someone who would not leave her, someone who understood her pain and was willing to walk through it with her. "Thank you," Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I could have made it through everything without you." The Count gave her a small smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "We all need someone," he said softly, his voice full of warmth. "And I'm glad it's you." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared understanding filling the space between them. Outside, the wind had died down, and the sky had begun to clear, as though the storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of calm. Maria didn't know what the future held for her or for Count Alexander, but she knew one thing for certain. they were no longer alone. And for the first time in her life, Maria felt hope. Hope for a future where she wasn't defined by her past. Hope for a life where she could stand tall, not as a victim, but as a woman who had found her strength. And maybe, just maybe, that future could begin right here, with him. "I've been thinking," Count Alexander said one evening as they sat together in the drawing room, the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. Maria looked up from the book she had been reading, her heart suddenly racing at the change in his tone. For days, things had been quieter between them, a comfortable kind of quiet that spoke of unspoken understanding. But tonight, there was something different in the air. "About what?" Maria asked, her voice tentative but curious. The Count leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest of his chair. "About you. About what you want from all of this," he replied, his gaze steady and searching. Maria felt a lump form in her throat as his words hung in the air between them. She had been living in the mansion for several weeks now, slowly adjusting to her new life. But the question of what she truly wanted from it all remained unanswered. "I don't know," she said honestly, her eyes lowering to her hands in her lap. "I've never really had the chance to think about it. I've always just gone along with whatever others decided for me." Count Alexander's eyes softened as he watched her. "You're not that person anymore, Maria. You don't have to let anyone decide your fate." Maria looked up at him, a flicker of hope stirring inside her at his words. "But how do I know what I want? What if I make the wrong choice? I've already made so many mistakes in my life." The Count stood up, walking to the window and staring out into the night. "We all make mistakes," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What matters is how we move forward from them. We can't keep looking back, or we'll never find the courage to move ahead." Maria stood up as well, drawn to him by the strength of his words and the unexpected warmth that seemed to radiate from him in that moment. "I want to believe that," she said softly, "but I'm scared. I don't know if I'm strong enough." The Count turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity. "You are stronger than you think," he said, his voice low and filled with conviction. "You've already shown that by being here, by taking a step into the unknown. I've watched you these past weeks, Maria. You are not the same woman you were when you first came here. You've grown." His words left her breathless. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever seen her as more than just a tool to be used. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, "but I want to find my place in it. I want to be someone who matters, who isn't afraid to stand up for what I believe in." Count Alexander's gaze softened, and he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "Then take that first step," he said quietly. "Start by choosing what you want, not what others expect of you. Your life is yours to shape now, and you don't have to do it alone." Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at him. She had never imagined that someone like Count Alexander, someone so powerful, could offer her such simple but profound words of encouragement. She had spent so much of her life in fear, in silence, letting others dictate her every move. But now, with him by her side, she felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could change her life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "for believing in me." The Count gave her a small smile, his eyes warm. "You don't need my belief, Maria. You just need to believe in yourself." And for the first time, Maria felt that belief stirring deep inside her, a seed planted in her heart, ready to grow. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at Greycourt Hall. With Count Alexander's words in her heart and the strength she had found within herself, she knew that the future was hers to shape, and she would face it with courage, with hope, and with the promise of a new beginning. The following weeks passed in a blur of quiet moments and small steps forward, but Maria could feel herself changing in ways she never expected. Greycourt Hall, once a place of cold isolation, had started to feel like home. The Count, though still distant at times, had become someone she could rely on. He didn't speak much about his past, but there were moments when his gaze softened, when she caught glimpses of the man beneath the title, the man who had been shaped by loss, just as she had been shaped by her own suffering. One afternoon, as the sun began to set over the sprawling grounds of Greycourt, Maria found herself in the garden again, her fingers gently brushing the petals of a rosebush she had been tending to for weeks. She had spent hours working on the garden, finding peace in the simple act of caring for something. It was a place where she could lose herself, away from the shadows of the past. She had grown to love this garden, its quiet beauty, its promise of new life. But as she knelt there, she couldn't help but wonder about the future. She had never known what her life could be, but now, with every passing day, she felt the weight of possibility. The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Count Alexander approaching, his usual stoic expression replaced by a rare softness in his eyes. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice low. "Not at all," Maria replied with a smile, standing to face him. "I was just thinking." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze searching hers, as if trying to read her mind. "What about?" Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "About what comes next," she said quietly. "I've spent so long trying to survive, just getting by, but now I feel like there's more. I don't know what it is, but I want to find out." Count Alexander's gaze softened, and for the first time, Maria saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before: hope. "You're not the same person who arrived here," he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. "You've changed, Maria. You've found your strength." Maria looked down at the roses, their vibrant colors blooming in the late afternoon light. "I'm still afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know where I belong in the world." The Count took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You belong here," he said firmly. "And you belong in whatever future you choose for yourself. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Life doesn't work that way." Maria looked up at him, her heart racing. His words were like a balm to her restless soul. "What if I make the wrong choice?" she asked, the doubt creeping back in. "What if I fail?" The Count reached out, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "We all fail, Maria. It's part of life. What matters is how we rise after the fall. You've already taken the hardest step. You've chosen to move forward." Maria felt her throat tighten at his words. There was so much truth in them, so much wisdom that she had never allowed herself to see. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. "I don't want to live in the shadow of my past forever." The Count's eyes softened, his hand slipping from her shoulder as he stepped back slightly. "Then don't," he said, his voice steady. "You have the power to let go of that fear. You have the power to create your own future." Maria stood there, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She had spent so much of her life in fear, in shame, in the belief that she wasn't worthy of anything more than the life that had been thrust upon her. But now, as she stood in this beautiful garden, surrounded by the quiet strength of the roses she had nurtured, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could have the life she had always dreamed of. And maybe, just maybe, she could find love in the process. Love for herself, and for the man who had helped her see the strength she had hidden all these years. "Thank you," Maria said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." Count Alexander gave her a small smile, his eyes warm. "I believe in you because you've shown me who you really are," he said softly. "And that person is stronger than you realize." For the first time since she had arrived at Greycourt Hall, Maria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the woman who had walked into this mansion weeks ago, broken and lost. She was someone new, someone who had found her strength, someone who could stand tall and face whatever came next. And with Count Alexander by her side, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. "I'm glad you're here," Count Alexander said quietly as he entered the library, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria looked up from the book she had been reading, her heart skipping a beat as her gaze met his. For the past few weeks, their bond had deepened, yet there was still a certain unspoken distance between them, something that neither of them had addressed. They had both been through so much, their worlds so different, yet they had found solace in each other. Maria smiled softly, setting the book aside. "I'm glad to be here," she replied, her voice steady. "I've learned more than I ever thought I would. About myself, about this place, about you." The Count's expression softened, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes that Maria hadn't seen before. "And what have you learned?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Maria took a deep breath, considering his question carefully. "I've learned that I'm not as broken as I thought. I've spent so long thinking I wasn't worth anything. that I didn't deserve more. But now I see that I have the power to choose, to change, to build the life I want. The Count nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. And what do you want, Maria? Maria felt a flicker of uncertainty, but it quickly faded as she remembered the steps she had already taken, the strength she had found in herself. I want to live freely, to make choices that are my own, she said with conviction. I want to build a future that is not shaped by fear or shame, but by hope and possibility. Count Alexander stood in front of her, his gaze intense. You've come a long way, he said, his voice low, almost reverent. You are stronger than you know. I've watched you change, Maria, in ways you may not even realize. Maria looked up at him, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper stirring in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. The Count stepped closer, his presence a comfort. I didn't save you, he said softly. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to start. Maria felt a rush of warmth at his words, her heart swelling with emotion. I think we both needed a place to start, she replied, her voice thick with feeling. Count Alexander's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his presence more comforting than ever. I'm glad it was here, he said quietly. And I'm glad it was with you. For a moment, time seemed to stop as they stood there, just the two of them, in the quiet of the library. It was as though everything had led to this moment, a realization that they had both found something in each other that they hadn't known they were looking for. Maria's heart raced, but she felt at peace, knowing that the future was hers to create, and that Count Alexander would be there, by her side, for whatever came next. What happens now? Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Count looked at her with a mixture of determination and something else, something she couldn't quite place, but recognized as hope. Now, he said, we take the next step together. Maria nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer alone. Together, she and Count Alexander would navigate the path before them, with strength, with hope, and with the promise of a future neither of them had ever expected but both now embraced. The fire crackled softly in the background as they stood there, side by side, ready for whatever came next. And in that moment, Maria knew that her journey had only just begun, and that the possibilities before her were endless.